On this day 129 years ago, the scramble to divide and occupy African territory experienced a major turning point when an African army led by Emperor Menelik II decisively crushed the invading Italian forces in the mountains of Adwa, Ethiopia. In an age of relentless European expansion, Emperor Menelik II's victory at Adwa was an example of black military excellence that effectively challenged the then prevailing racist colonial ideology of white superiority and black inferiority. The victory ultimately ensured Ethiopia's sovereignty, making it the only African empire to remain free from European colonization at that time. Many historians and Ethiopian nationalists consider the victory of Adwa as Ethiopia's finest hour. But what if I told you that the meaning of Adwa is not as straightforward as the history books say? What if I told you that today, 129 years later, Adwa is not just a symbol of African resistance, but also a site of deep political and ideological divisions in Ethiopia. And that for a considerate part of the Ethiopian society, the victory of Adwa is associated with a rather painful and traumatic past. In today's video, I will explain to you why the battle that once united Ethiopians against colonialism is now a point of conflict in Ethiopia's political landscape, and why its legacy is so contested. My name is Wayne. If you're new to this channel, welcome. I am a cultural anthropologist and historian in African studies, and on this channel, Plan Back to Africa, I share my journey of leaving behind Germany to travel the African continent together with my two children. And I also love to share my knowledge and experiences about the socio-political realities on the ground, as well as business and investment opportunities to inspire the diaspora to visit the African continent, settle on the African continent, and reconnect with their roots. Now, without any delay, let's dive straight into today's topic. Now, what made Adwa such a historic victory? In the late 19th century, the scramble for Africa was in full swing. The European powers had already colonized almost the entire continent, except for Ethiopia. Italy thought it would be an easy target, but they severely underestimated Menelik II's and Ethiopia's military strategy. On March the 1st in 1896, Ethiopian forces led by Emperor Menelik II and Empress Taitu decisively crushed the Italians in the mountainous terrain of Adwa. It was one of the greatest defeats a colonial power had ever suffered in Africa. More than 11,000 Italian troops were either killed or captured, and Ethiopia's sovereignty was secured. For those who don't know, I am a daughter of Adwa. My family lives in Adwa. This is where I have my roots. And since I was a child, I was always fascinated about hearing the stories from my uncles that were passed over by our forefathers and their military strategy. It's so fascinating. Especially for the Black African diaspora, Adwa carries a very symbolic and powerful meaning. Adwa became, particularly during the radical history movement of the 1960s, the foundation upon which Ethiopianist intellectuals and historians from other African countries and the Black diaspora elevated Ethiopia to a symbol of Black Pan-African freedom and liberation. Inevitably, the victory of Adwa has been primarily remembered, narrated, and also interpreted in racial terms and within the framework of colonialism, with its historical significance mainly attributed to a victory of a Black army over a white army. For many, Adwa became the ultimate symbol of Ethiopian pride and also proof that Africa could resist colonialism. But here's the thing, what many people don't know is that the legacy of Adwa is far more complex and complicated than just a simple story of Black resistance. From the very beginning, Adwa was way more than just a military victory. It became one of the most powerful political tools. And the way it was remembered, the way it was used and even manipulated, has shaped the Ethiopian political landscape for over a century. Ethiopia's imperial imperial ruling elite, especially under Emperor Haile Selassie, built an entire ideology around Adwa and used Adwa to craft a national identity and national narrative. But here's the big problem. This Ethiopian national identity and the underlying national narrative is built on a selective memory of Adwa. It glorifies Emperor Menelik II while at the same time ignoring the massive sacrifices and contributions of regional forces, and it also erased the divisions that existed even back then. Imagine the very people who helped win the Battle of Adwa were later marginalized and oppressed. And this leads us to one of the biggest sources of tension today. Who really owns the victory of Adwa? Is it an Ethiopian victory, an Amhara victory, a Tigrayan victory, an Oromo victory, a Pan-African victory? The answer really depends on who you ask. For many Ethiopians that celebrate the victory of Adwa today, Adwa represents unity, pride, and resistance. But for other Ethiopians, the historically marginalized societies to be precise, Adwa is a reminder of betrayal and erasure. Their painful and traumatic memories and lived experiences have been systematically silenced and sidelined by the official narrative about Adwa, and therefore left a complex legacy for various reasons. First and foremost, Emperor Menelik II, who is remembered and celebrated as the mastermind and hero of the Battle of Adwa, was also responsible for some of the worst crimes against humanity, against societies in the south who opposed his military campaign and brutal southward expansion, which he carried out in the 1880s and 1890s. To the Walaita, for instance, Adwa serves as a painful reminder of the military campaign that Emperor Menelik and his generals carried out against them in 1894. 2 years later, Emperor Menelik and his generals would go down in history at Adwa. The case of the destruction of the Walaita kingdom is a perfect example that illustrates how different histories of violence, the colonial violence on the one side and internal oppression on the other, are deeply interconnected with each other and even inseparably linked with each other. The historian Raymond Jonas, who wrote this amazing book that I can recommend to everyone, it's called The Battle of Adwa, Victory at the Age of Empire, concludes that there was a direct link between the conquest of Walaita and the Battle of Adwa. From 1888 to 1892, livestock disease and severe famine in central and northern Ethiopia depleted the Shoan population, and Ethiopian armies were running low on supply. And as a result, Emperor Menelik II launched a military campaign which was essentially nothing more than the destruction and massive pillage of one of the wealthiest and well-organized kingdoms in the south. It is estimated that more than 100,000 inhabitants of Walaita were either killed or taken prisoner. In addition, almost 20,000 people, including women and children, were enslaved and forced to transport grain and drive the tens of thousands of cattle that were stolen. Historian Raymond Jonas concludes that this massive pillage of the Walaita people gave Emperor Menelik II the means to advance north with his army and defeat Italy at the Battle of Adwa. Like the Walaita, the Oromo, Ethiopia's largest yet marginalized ethnic group, remember Emperor Menelik II as a cruel colonizer who brutally subjugated and assimilated them into his empire and left them poor on the peripheries of a state that did not fully acknowledge them as equal citizens. And it is exactly these painful and traumatic collective memories that led to the understanding that the Battle of Adwa was nothing more than a traditional conflict between two colonial powers, Ethiopia on the one hand and Italy on the other, in which they and other conquered peoples of the south paid unnecessary sacrifices. Another important reason for the ambivalence towards Adwa is that Emperor Menelik was able to consolidate his empire thanks to the victory of Adwa and the prestige that it brought, depleting the capacity of the people he had conquered earlier to resist. And also Tigrayans remain ambivalent towards the victory of Adwa, despite the fact that the battle was fought in Tigray. And one of the main reasons for Tigrayans' ambivalence towards the victory of Adwa is that Emperor Menelik, in the aftermath of the Battle of Adwa, followed a policy of marginalization towards his rivals in the north, his Tigrayan rivals, that also laid claim on the throne. Ras Mengesha, the son of Emperor Johannes, was denied the title Negus of Tigray, which means King of Tigray, and later replaced as Governor of Tigray by Emperor Menelik II's nephew, Ras Mekonnen. Eventually, Ras Mengesha was even exiled to Ankober in the south, where he remained until his death. Unfortunately, the aftermath of the victory of Adwa receives not enough attention, and also the treaties that were signed between Emperor Menelik II and the British, the French, and the Italians, which defined the state borders that we know of Ethiopia today. Ethiopia was perceived by many people as a colonial force that incorporated millions of people that were not considered Ethiopians prior to Menelik's reign through territorial expansion and forced into the Ethiopian Empire. And this interpretation contested the long and firmly established national narrative of Ethiopia's supposed 3,000-year-long uninterrupted history of nationhood, in which Adwa is portrayed as the key event that ensured this dynasty's survival at the time of Ethiopia's greatest peril. Many people in Ethiopia believe instead that Ethiopia had existed within its currently existing borders, which have changed only little since that period, for over a century only, and that the victory of Adwa was the testimony of multi-ethnic collaboration rather than Ethiopian nationhood. For them, Adwa is not just about independence, it's also about internal oppression. Yet, in Ethiopia's state-sanctioned national narrative and collective memory, these contesting voices and painful and traumatic collective memories of marginalized groups in Ethiopia are effectively being erased, silenced, and sidelined. And as if that is not enough, their role, their contributions, and sacrifices in the battle are being downplayed. Up to this day, the Ethiopian government continues to use Adwa as a tool of propaganda, celebrating unity while waging war on the very people who fought in this battle. In the year 2021, at the height of the genocidal war against the Tigray region, the Ethiopian government held massive Adwa Day celebrations in Ethiopia's capital Addis Ababa, while Adwa itself was under occupation by Eritrean forces. For Tigrayans, it rightfully felt like history is repeating itself again, since many soldiers that fought in the ranks of the Italian colonial army were Eritrean askaris. And Tigrayans saw this rightfully as hypocrisy of the highest order. I mean, how can you celebrate Adwa while bombing Adwa? And how can you claim unity while committing unspeakable atrocities against your own people? And this is exactly why Adwa remains so divisive. It's both a source of pride, but also a weapon of political control. Its memory is shaped by power, and its meaning shifts depending on who holds the power. Like George Orwell once said, those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future. So the big question is, what do we do with Adwa's legacy? Should we allow our leaders to continue using it as a political weapon of control? Or can Adwa finally be reclaimed by us, the people, as a symbol of real unity, of justice, and of resistance against all forms of oppression? I personally believe for Adwa to truly belong to all Ethiopians and in extension Africans, we need to acknowledge its contradictions. It wasn't just a battle between black and white, it was also a battle between different Ethiopian groups, and its legacy continues to haunt the entire region until this day. Yes, as Ethiopians and in extension Africans and black people worldwide, we should be proud of the victory of Adwa. It's a source of pride, rightfully, but does that mean we should erase the painful aspects of that past? Like, for instance, while the Italian prisoners of war were sent back home and released, Eritrean askaris were brutally punished and mutilated after their capture. Historical accounts indicate that some captured Eritrean askaris had their right hands and left leg cut off as a form of punishment. And it is widely believed that Ras Mengesha Yohannes, the son of Emperor Yohannes, was responsible for ordering this brutal and barbaric punishment against the Eritrean Askaris. Ras Mengesha played a key role in the Ethiopian forces that fought against Italy in this battle, and his actions reflected the deep resentment towards Eritrean soldiers who sided with the Italians. This punishment against the Eritrean soldiers was a brutal and symbolic act to signify their betrayal and to discourage others from siding with foreign colonial forces in the future. However, the mutilation remains a painful aspect of Ethiopian-Eritrean relations and history. It reflects the complex dynamics of loyalty, betrayal, and resistance during the colonial era, as well as the enduring impact of Italian colonization on the relations between Eritrea and Ethiopia. So today we must ask ourselves, who benefits from Adwa's complex legacy and who is being erased from it? Let's continue this conversation respectfully, please, in the comment section below. Let me know what you think and what Adwa means to you. Is it a symbol of unity and resistance, or is it a tool of division? I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to see you next time. Bye.